This week, it's our first show of 2024. And no, we will not be covering year-end reviews, 2024 predictions, or New Year's resolutions. Instead, we welcome Mike Scott, Chief Information Security Officer at Immuta, to discuss best practices for moving sensitive data into the cloud. In the Leadership and Communications section, advice to aspiring CISOs. Wait till you hear that advice. New risk management frameworks help with SEC mandate compliance. A simple hack to help you communicate more effectively, and more. Business Security Weekly starts now.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
Broadcasting live, it's the show where we explore the business of security to improve the security of business. Your trusted source for actionable insights on leadership, communication, and innovation. Get ready for Business Security Weekly. Panoptica, Cisco's cloud application security solution, provides end-to-end lifecycle protection for cloud-native application environments. It empowers organizations to safeguard their APIs, serverless functions, containers, and Kubernetes environments. Panoptica ensures comprehensive cloud security, compliance, and monitoring at scale, offering deep visibility, contextual risk assessments, and actionable remediation insights for all your cloud assets. Get more information at securityweekly.com/Panoptica. If your organization is ready to embrace edge computing, we have good news. The 2023 AT&T Cybersecurity Insights Report provides everything you need to know to get started. In the report, we identify the common characteristics of edge computing. We found edge use cases are rapidly coming online, and we reveal how to secure edge computing. Most importantly, you'll learn how to prepare for your edge ecosystem. Get your complimentary copy of the report today by visiting securityweekly.com/ATT Cybersecurity. That's securityweekly.com/ATT Cybersecurity. Welcome to Business Security Weekly. This is episode number 333, recorded January 8th, 2024. Happy New Year, everyone. I am your host, Matt Alderman. Joining me today for this show, I'm our co-host remotely. First, Mr. Jason Albuquerque. Jason, we have not talked football in like over a month, dude.
Oh my God. Listen, I do have a prediction though. One prediction. The New England Patriots will not make the Super Bowl. Now it's all about trying to figure out. Safe. Yeah, it's trying to figure out what's going to happen to our good friend, Mr. Belichick. You know, that's going to be the news around New England coming soon. So, but I'm interested to see what's going to happen in the playoffs. 49ers are still scary. Ravens are still scary. The Bills just put one over on Miami too, so it's going to be interesting playoffs.
Yeah, and Philadelphia just continues their slide. It's like crazy to see the last like 5 or 6 games from those guys.
Oh my God, you talk about choking in the last 5 games, man. Wow, epic choke.
Yeah. Also joining for this segment, Mr. Ben Carr. Hey, welcome, Ben.
Hey, Matt, how's it going today? We got to find something that we can rap back and forth about because you guys got the football thing. We need to find our thing.
Yeah, maybe some Texas weather or something. I don't know. I got a little rain this morning, but
it's been raining here, nasty. Yeah, not been pleasant.
Yeah, better than the snow in New England, that's for sure.
Truth.
Security Weekly listeners, cyber threats are evolving. Is your organization keeping up? The 2023 Cybersecurity Year in Review is here. Uncover the latest challenges and strategic responses in CRA's 2023 Cybersecurity Year in Review, sponsored by RSA Conference. From the impact of generative AI to the risks of ransomware to navigating new SEC rulings, get ahead for 2024 with your free copy. Download the report at securityweekly.com/Year in Review 2023. And no, I'm not covering it on the show, so it doesn't count. All right. Mike Scott is the CISO of Immuta, whose mission is to make the future of data secure. He is known for his work building enterprise-ready security programs, security architecture, and data privacy and protection. Mike is passionate about always doing the right thing to protect customers, employees, and investors. Mike, welcome to Business Security Weekly.
Oh, thank you. I'm excited to be here. Really looking forward to today's discussion.
Yeah, so we're going to talk, one of my 3 triads. As everybody knows, I'm an app user data guy, right? My prediction back in 2015, here we are in 2024, was there were only really 3 types of controls that CISOs would be able to manage in the future: application, users, and data, because who knew where your infrastructure was going to run? The pandemic hits, and here we are in this rapidly accelerating move to not in office for a lot of things, people, infrastructure, et cetera, which makes the data side of this a little more important. And so we're going to talk a little bit today with you about what are some of those best practices when you think about how do you move data from what was a pretty well protected kind of data center up into these new cloud world. But before we get into some of the best practices, let's start with kind of the problem statement and kind of the challenges around this. Like, it's not easy moving data into the cloud, is it?
No, I mean, it's when you think about all the dependencies you have in a data center, applications, how everything's working, a lot of times even the technical team really doesn't fully understand, what makes data operations work. So just getting a good understanding of what you have and how you're going to transition it into an environment where a lot of times your existing controls may or may not actually scale or function in the cloud the way you're used to. So there's definitely a lot of complexities and a lot of planning required.
Yeah, and a lot of organizations did not have the time to properly plan back in 2020 when we hit the pandemic. Have we gotten any better in the last 3 years, roughly?
Oh, wow. That's a great one. I think it depends on who we are. If you're in the enterprise and above, I think you've naturally progressed and matured, mainly because you've had to. Privacy regulations, even in the United States at the state level, continue to evolve. So I think, the larger organizations have been forced to really reconcile and deal with this versus some of us, like, at Immuta, we're still kind of in that startup technology realm. And so this is, probably for me, what's really made this easy is we were cloud native from the beginning. So we didn't have to move anything from the data center. But my experience, years ago with Wendy's, it was a huge challenge as we started looking at how we were going to take sensitive workflows that made sense and put them up in the cloud, and then realizing that we had a lot of dependencies that just would not transition. So, I definitely think that lack of planning has probably put a lot of people in catch-up mode. Luckily, a lot of folks are moving into, applications as a service, which is a little bit easier. But I think even the large enterprises, like some of our customers that I work with, are still just now getting to moving those sensitive data stores into the cloud. They've moved a lot of other things out there for, R&D, different things, but they're not moving their sensitive data really until the next couple of years, including I work with a really large banking organization, and they're on a 3-year roadmap that starts this year to move all of their sensitive workflow to the cloud.
Yeah. And Mike, I don't know if you're seeing this as well, but a lot of the emerging enterprise, higher end mid-market organizations through the pandemic, they've been in a hybrid situation, right? They moved a lot of their collaboration workloads up to the cloud for the remote workforce, but are now getting into that situation where they're planning to take the rest of their digital real estate and move it over. How important is that planning aspect? I equate it to estate planning, right? So doing your digital estate planning, looking at your workloads, looking at your assets, looking at whether or not you can take advantage of this opportunity to rehost, refactor, re-architect, maybe even replace some of that technical debt, and then really rebuild your strategy from security baselines, identity management, your data classification, data management. A lot of that is what we cover in this show, that say easy, do hard. How important is that do hard piece of planning to start migrating the rest of your digital real estate up to the cloud?
Mikey, before you jump in, I wanted to touch on that same thing that Jason's bringing up and just kind of have you answer this as well. Like, it's not the same, right? I think that's the mistake that a lot of people make as they're in this transformation, is they assume that it's just a lift and shift, like move it from one type of workload to another. But the way in which those workloads operate and the way in which you do that most efficiently, both from a security perspective as well as a cost perspective, it's just different. It has to be approached in a different way. Do you agree?
Absolutely. I think that's why the planning process is so important, because, you find out really quick that, you're probably going to use different data stores. You're not going to move a big SQL database necessarily into the cloud. They're often better technologies. And then also, as you look at how you're going to interlink those, a ton of planning has to go in place just to make the function happen, just to make the actual data be able to move seamlessly. And then what most people find is when they get into the cloud, they don't have the same control and visibility. I definitely started my career at a point where I had a physical cable between me and the internet for everything. And there was a lot of security and sense of security in that, versus now being in a cloud native organization for my second time. You have to get that assurance in different ways. And, we're using a completely different set of tools than I would have used at an enterprise company. And a lot of our even audit practices, we've really had to evolve, because the way you will do something in a Windows or a Linux environment is very different than how you're going to do it in Kubernetes. So that planning phase is the absolutely most critical. We say that security professionals all the time, but in this case, just to get that functionality and to understand also what your cost is going to be and what your training impact going to be. There's a lot of moving parts in this, and there's no lift and shift. I think it's a completely new way of transacting business. At least that's what I've seen.
Yeah, and to Jason's point a little bit, like, you have to think about the underlying access to these systems. It's very different than on-prem, right? I've been doing a lot of research on how permissions are applied in AWS, for example, because we're looking to extend our role-based access control flexibility, right? It's super complex when you think about how permissions are assigned out to these different resources in the cloud, which makes it more challenging of the interaction of user to system to data is actually implemented in the cloud versus on-prem. That's a unique challenge in itself to make it, I think, very difficult to understand, like, what are the effective overall user permissions or user access rights in the cloud?
Absolutely. And you usually don't have, a homogeneous environment, right? It's very common for large enterprise customers now to be using Databricks and Snowflake and maybe some SQL and some RDS. And so now not only do you have these very complex rule sets, and I think, from having a network background, a lot of the rules make sense, but new infrastructure teams, when they transition to the cloud, a lot of times struggle with that rule-based set and how to configure it. And then on top of that, you exacerbate that with, maybe I'm multi-cloud as well. So now I've got multiple new data stores that I haven't worked with before. I'm working with AWS and probably some Azure, maybe some GCP. And with each one of those, there's differences in how we apply the rules. And so when you think just permissions, as we talked about, you're not just doing that in one place like you used to do with Active Directory, because now we've got data store permissions like Snowflake permissions that are very granular at the data level. And so when you take and put all of those together, just getting a comprehensive view of where your rules are at and how your access is working becomes exponentially more complicated than on-prem.
Yeah, which makes this challenge of data security and data access, I think, really challenging. Is I'm trying to protect the data because I don't want it to be to leak or get breached. But if I can't understand data access, how am I supposed to validate data security and then take it to the next level, which is data privacy, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that differentiation because, for the longest time, we were able to manage on just role-based access. And, if you're in marketing, you get access to marketing. And that made a lot of sense when things were within our walls. Now, when you look at cloud data and the way we're accessing it and the ease that it can be shifted, now we're really looking at data-centric controls. And just because you're in marketing doesn't mean you need access to the entire database or the entire table. And then how do you do that quickly and effectively? And I think one of the challenges that I've seen and heard from our customers, we have the pleasure of working with a lot of Fortune 500 and larger organizations, is even they're struggling with the democratization of data, where now a data user can do so much more than they could do with very few rules in place. And they can create a lot of harm and they can create a lot of value. The security team doesn't really understand that data access piece, and why does marketing only need access to, one database or one table and not the other? And so it's also forced a lot of collaboration between data operations team, the privacy team, security team, to really start to understand that, I can't effectively secure a large data store without a great connection with the data officer, or, with the analytics team or whoever's running that, because they're going to have to help me understand which policies apply and what rules we apply and why, because they're understanding the business at a much deeper level. And so what we see now from our side, and what I'm seeing professionally, is you have to be fluent in data operations, at least enough to be able to have an intelligent conversation and understand how are we going to architect these data access controls, because the security side of it is a little bit easier, just to limit to just employees have access. Now we're getting much more granular, and we have to, and as you said, to enable a real strong privacy program, you have to be able to defend who has access, when, why, and for how long.
Now, Mike, given what you just said, does that lend a little bit more need for our teams to work with the business units on data classification? Because at the end of the day, our digital assets, our data are part of our digital assets, and we need to make sure we have the right protections around our data sets. But in order to do that, we need to be able to work with the business to classify that data. And in what I've seen over the course of my career is that these business units don't always necessarily know, unless you're starting to go through these exercises with them, about what types of data we should be securing, how we should be classifying, really educating the business unit in data management, so that way they can make intelligent decisions from there on how to classify it, then in turn how to protect it. That's another one of those things that's really hard to do, because it takes time, it takes effort, and it takes collaboration of multiple stakeholders within the organization. Does this lend to a little bit more focus now on data classification? I throw in now AI to the mix. Now it's just not the humans that we have to worry about. Now it's about these AI engines scanning all of our data.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I've seen with some of the customers I've worked with is that need to educate the common user. So it's not even about the data operators and the data scientists and analysts anymore. It's beginning that data classification education at the user level, so that they understand these are the types of information we're really concerned with, and why, and really helping them to be that early warning system. I've talked to several Fortune 100 clients who have quite expansive data, what do they call it? Basically data knowledge training for all of their employees, so that they at a minimum, they understand, hey, maybe this is risky, I should just ask. And what they're seeing is one of our, I'd say, really large clients, is the more that they train the users, the more data they can unlock and the more value they're able to get out of all the data they've been storing. And so, like an interesting use case that I heard that was really fascinating, as security experts, we love to be able to help the business and show that we're enabling, was a company was able to leverage years of HR data during the pandemic, because they had the right data controls in place, to be able to start looking on why are people leaving? What are the compounding factors that we see on this large scale? And we're able to actually make some measurable gains in employee retention based off being able to mine HR data that in the past, many of us would have said, no, we're not going to open that up to analytics, or we're not going to integrate that into, Snowflake or Databricks, because there's just too much PII in it. Now we're starting to see, when people have the right controls in place, they're actually able to unlock things and enable the business in a way that we just really haven't been able to before. But that depends on those data operators and those users helping us classify that data. And I think that's really been the trend, at least that I've been following for years, is pushing that classification into the department and the users' hands, and really focusing on giving them the ability to at least take a stab at it and then come back to us and build that practice internally. Because, you simply, with the volume and velocity of data today, there's just no way a security team is going to be able to keep up with this without literally every single data user having some type of expertise in this.
I absolutely love that, Mike. Yet another case for educating the end user, getting them embedded in security, and just really putting it in the DNA of every single employee. I love it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the assumption of the stupid worker doesn't work anymore, right? I mean, we've dealt with that for a long time, where we've just assumed that people didn't understand it, and so we were going to manage it for them. But years ago, I found this at Nokia. We were doing a problem on this exact thing, data classification, and we found that if you actually empowered the users to understand what they were doing and then make decisions on that, they were best informed to make the decision because they actually owned the data, right? They knew what the data was, and so they could tell you whether it was something sensitive or not. So I think that's a great point that you bring up.
Thank you.
Yeah, the other thing that I want to close the loop on here is we were doing a tabletop exercise right before the holidays, and one of the things we realized is, how do you deal with backup and recovery in the cloud? And when you're dealing with a SaaS provider, for example, it's like, well, wait a minute, is that in our contract? Are they doing that? Are we doing that? We can't forget about backup and recovery for this data set either. I mean, it ties back into data classification, but we're so focused on moving data, providing access, securing data, we can't forget that if something happens, where's our backups? How are we going to recover this data? That's another element here that I don't want us to forget about in this conversation.
Yeah, I think that's a great call out because, like I said, our platform, Immuta's platform is cloud native. And admittedly, I've been in this industry long enough that I still cringe a little bit that there's not a backup tape or there's not a physical piece of media somewhere with our data on it. Everything is now virtual. But when you think about transitioning from the data center, you had that real physical copy and maybe you had, some offsite facility you're sending tapes to, that really becomes impractical in the cloud. And so you have to really start looking at redundancy options and what is your recovery mechanism, and like in our internal case, doing a recovery from a backup is absolutely the worst case scenario. We've built our system much more for, standard CI/CD pipeline, but the ability to be able to just quickly redeploy and resync an instance versus actually doing a real restore and, point in time and type things, for our system made sense. But I think for a lot of people, they're going to have to go and figure that out because that backup mechanism they did in the past and their complete DR and BC plan is probably going to have to change dramatically to match the cloud. I think, the one real advantage here is if you're in a smaller enterprise, it actually becomes more cost effective because there are options where you can go into deep freeze type retention for longevity that's really cheap versus your online. So DR and BC is a huge conversation as we transition to the cloud, and then also looking at what are your third party providers doing? Are they able to meet your policies? A lot of us have outsourced email and various things to providers. Are they able to meet your recovery time and how do they fit into your recovery plan if you're depending on them?
Yep. Yeah, we kind of learned that through the tabletop. Like, wait, how do we get all of our Salesforce data back? Like, that's all of our customer data. Like, if it vanished, like, how fast could you get it back? Right? Nobody could answer that question. I'm like, there's an issue for us to track. So Mike, as we finish up this segment, like what are some of the top recommendations? Like how should organizations start thinking through kind of these planning steps? What are those kind of top 3-4 steps that organizations really need to think about as they're getting ready to migrate in their sensitive data into the cloud?
Sure. I think, the first one is having a really clear data inventory and understanding, what do I have? What's the value of it? And why do I want to move this to the cloud? I think it's a very important first step is because as you go through and catalog your systems, you're going to find dependencies that are going to maybe slow down your transition of, maybe your HR function to the cloud and maybe you focus on finance. But starting with that inventory and really understanding dependencies and what the advantages are to moving to the cloud first is probably the first step. The second step, I would say, building off of that is really then prioritizing, what's going to create the most value for the business. It's not just about security value, but that could be some of it is, am I going to be able to be more efficient? Am I going to have better recovery options if I move to the cloud? And in some cases, I truly believe that there could be security wins of moving to the cloud as well, because you're ditching that, long-term depreciation of capital assets and able to move to new technologies on a regular basis. And then I think, once you have your full inventory and you've kind of got your prioritized approach, then that really is working with your partners and developing a plan of, okay, as we move this, what are we going to have to put in place that we no longer have? We're not going to have physical firewalls anymore. So are we going to use AWS firewalls or Azure firewalls? Are we going to use a third party? There's a lot of technology discussions that have to be made in that third phase of really understanding, as we shift these things, these are kind of the precursors before we can move data in. And then I think, the final phase is going back and doing a lot of testing and evaluating and making sure that you have the most efficient setup, and you're also secure and protected in the same way you were before. I think that's important because during that phase, you typically start finding that rather than bringing new data stores or moving new things as your second phase, a lot of times you're kind of redoing phase one because you've learned a few things and maybe you've figured out some automations that need to be in place. But it's to me, it's a cycle, right? It's we're never completely transitioned to the cloud, in my opinion. We're always doing something a little different. But if you build that foundation, through all of the planning and the mapping exercises, you're going to be able to adjust quickly and understand why you made a decision, and then respond quickly. And I think over time, what you're able to do is with that revisit, especially if you do that, we try to do it on an annual basis at a minimum. You can also start looking for what were the gains that we made that the business wasn't expecting and reporting that back. Probably as a final thing is continuing to report back to the business. What are we getting out of this cloud transition? I think most of us are at a point now where we have to. It's not really a choice. But at the end of the day, I think there's always value as a security professional in showing the business what we've achieved and maybe even what we learned from in the process.
Oh, Jason, value back.
Value back to the organization, critical. And you want to know what? Continuous improvement. I love that you hit on that, right? Constantly reporting back to the organization on the gains, on the needs, where we need to shift gears, where there are still gaps. That way you can get the right investment back from the business.
Absolutely.
Mike, thank you so much for joining us on Business Security Weekly.
Oh, thank you for the invite and for having me. I've really appreciated the conversation.
You're welcome. We're going to take a quick break and then cover the leadership and communications articles for this week.